So Bette Davis and I also, our story. So Betty, I loved Bette Davis because Bette Davis had such heart. She worked out with us for 1 month. So we got to eat and talk and sit around her. And so she was an Aries. I found out she was an Aries. So I said, Betty, you're an Aries, aren't you? She said, yes, I am. I said, well, I'm an Aries too. Do you ever get paranoid? And she looked at me, she said, paranoid, never. It's always my fault. And I loved her from that moment on. And I remember someone was so excited, Rose Grimaldi was so excited that Bette Davis was on the set. She ran up to Betty, she said, Betty, I named my car after you. And Bette Davis kind of fluffed her feathers up and said, really? What kind of car? Expecting, I assume, a Mercedes. And Rose said, it's a Volkswagen. And I remember Bette Davis kind of rolling her eyes. And then I had this great idea because Bette Davis smoked Camel cigarettes. And she'd get this red lipstick all over, no filter. She'd smoke them and then she'd just flick them out. So I started going around to all the ashtrays and pouring all the ashtrays into one big jar till I had a full jar of red butted lipstick Bette Davis cigarettes, butts. And my idea was I was going to build a plexiglass table, put sand in it, and put all of Bette Davis's butts sticking in it. I was going to call it Betty's coffee table. So she finally stopped me. The last day I was collecting her butts. She said, Toad, what are you doing with all my butts? My butts. And I said, I'm going to make this Bette Davis table. And she just looked at me for a long time and she said, that's a very good idea, and just took the whole thing away from me. She did not want me to have her butts, but what a great idea, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Had a Bette Davis butt table with all those red cigarette butts just sticking in this white sand.
So tell me about the music video that you did. How did that happen?
So Kim Carnes did Bette Davis Eyes. My fiance at the time was Guy Thomas, who worked with Ken Cragen, who represented Kim Carnes. And so they asked me to choreograph it. And it was called Bette Davis Eyes. And they wanted to meet Bette Davis. And so I talked to Betty about it. And she said, you know, it's a wonderful idea because my daughter won't let any of my grandchildren see any movies, but maybe they'll watch a rock video. And it was the very, very beginning of rock videos. In fact, I think it was one of the very first. And so they wouldn't let me talk to Betty after that, which really upset me. They went in and talked to Betty, but Bette Davis asked them if I could play her, because there's a whole shadow of Bette Davis during the whole song, because she's got Bette Davis eyes. So I was through the whole video, and plus I choreographed it. And so at the end, several months afterwards, Bette Davis, somehow we were in contact one more time. She was very happy. She said her grandchildren actually had watched it and loved it, just loved it. We're very impressed now with their grandmother. And it won all kinds of awards. It was the first video of its kind visually. And, it won all kinds of